Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to the 104th Town Hall hosted by Representative Chrissy Houlahan. My name is Erin Cecil Smith, and I will be your moderator tonight. For those of you who joined us at a town hall before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, we're super happy that you're here with us tonight. Before we get into a conversation with Chrissy, let me point out that she's permitted by law to discuss only official activities during this town hall. There is a legal distinction between unofficial and official activities for Congresspeople, and we have to be careful to distinguish between the two. During this call, we can't discuss political campaigns or candidates, for example. So another way to think about this is your questions can be about policies, but not politics. Okay, now let me tell you how you can ask those questions. You can do it in two ways. If you want to submit a question online, you can use your phone, tablet, or laptop. Go to houlahan.house.gov/live and submit your question. And I will repeat that. houlahan.house.gov/live. If you want to ask a question live, please press *3 on your phone. You will be connected right away to one of my colleagues in our Westchester, Reading, or Washington, D.C. offices, and will assist you. So again, press *3 if you want to ask your question live. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to get up-to-date information about what's happening in the community and down here in Washington. So if you're not already a subscriber, at any point during tonight's meeting, you can press *6 and we will add you immediately. And then, of course, if you don't already, please follow Representative Houlahan on social media. You can find her on Facebook, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads. Thank you. Now, let me introduce you to your host and Representative Chrissy Houlahan.
Thanks, Erin, and I want to make sure that you can hear me okay.
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Excellent, and thank you very much again, Erin, for bringing us all together. I am speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and I will be heading shortly to late votes this evening around 8 o'clock. Thank you all very much for taking the time tonight to join us. I know you have other choices with what to do with your time, and we are appreciative of you spending time with us. In the 103 town halls that we have hosted since coming to Congress 7 years ago, I felt usually very confident that I could offer you information or context that would help you make sense of what was happening here in Washington, D.C., and to be able to explain how my team and I are working on our behalves, your behalf, both here and in our district. But tonight I'm a little less confident because what's happening in America and here in Washington, D.C. certainly is really what one would call unprecedented. And I really know that word is grossly overused, but it really feels like the only one that I can come up with to capture the moment that we are in right now. A government shutdown that has recently ended, that has become the longest in our nation's history. I'd like to put an asterisk on that and say that I was sworn into the second longest shutdown in history as a freshman in Congress under the first Trump administration. That shutdown has left hundreds of thousands of federal workers with pay disruptions, with critical service disrupted, as well for those of us who are citizens. A national debt currently that is surging past $38 trillion, a consumer protection agency that is created after the financial crisis that we all, or many of us of a certain age, remember, that is now facing elimination. Federal forces being deployed into American cities in a way that we haven't seen in generations, frankly. These are all not normal. These are not routine policy disagreements. They are fundamental stresses to our very democracy, to our institutions, and to our shared sense of stability, for lack of a better way of describing it. And despite that scale of these kinds of disruptions and the uncertainty that they create, I'm really still very dedicated and committed to showing up for you and to listening and doing the very patient and steady work that I think that you ask of me, that the representative government that we all share and value requires. And so that's what brings us to tonight, our 100-plus town hall. This one is what's called a Questions for Chrissy town hall. This is your chance to ask me anything, so to speak, anything that's on your mind regarding maybe national issues or local concerns, federal casework or ideas for federal casework, or simply what you just might want to understand better in what is a very, very challenging environment and moment. And so my goal, as with all of these conversations, is to answer as best and as honestly and clearly as I'm able to, and make sure that you leave this conversation feeling informed and feeling heard. And with that, I will hand it back over to Erin to get us started. Erin, if you wouldn't mind kind of reminding us how we ask questions, and then we'll go ahead and head to questions.
You got it, Chrissy. Thank you. If you want to ask a question, submit using your phone, tablet, or laptop. Go to houlahan.house.gov/live. You will be able to enter your question there. If you want to ask your question live, please hit *3 on your phone, and you will be connected to one of my colleagues who will take you through the process. And Chrissy, we have questions stacking up. So I'm going to tell you the first question that came in online. This is from Ramon in Kennett Square, and he says, I have friends in the Pennsylvania National Guard. What is going on with our military? Why are we blowing boats and people up and sending in battleships?
Well, thank you, Ramon, for that very important question. We actually have a member of our team who is part of the Pennsylvania National Guard and is in training right now, and we are very appreciative for her service both in our office as well as through the Guard. What we're doing in the Caribbean is worrisome and arguably illegal. There appears to be no real legal basis for these kinds of strikes, and their repetitiveness and the abundance of them makes them even more questionable. Law enforcement officers are really the only people who are authorized to use lethal force against individuals who are posing imminent threat during maritime interdictions, and these are not law enforcement officers in this particular case. So there is no defined or clear authority that is being used right now to interdict against these drug traffickers and these cartels. And please believe me, I very much believe that we need to be addressing this issue of cartels and of drug enforcement, but I'm not certain, in fact, I'm quite certain that this is not the way to manage this. The president constitutionally cannot take unilateral authority on these kinds of actions. In fact, it is the responsibility of Congress to declare war in one way, shape, or form. And in many ways, our president has declared war on these cartels and is blowing these ships out of the water without having any sort of briefing for Congress of any magnitude, and without having any sort of authorization or authority from Congress. So how do we fix this? You know, I'm co-sponsor of a war powers resolution bill that would block further military action and further strikes from the Caribbean or in the Caribbean by the Trump administration without first providing the Congress evidence that these are in fact drug smugglers, and that these are in fact related to some sort of a war or aggression from places such as Venezuela. I think that one of the things that's most alarming to me, I serve on the Armed Services and the Intelligence Committees in Congress, and over the past 50 plus days of the shutdown, trust me, I have been working diligently, whether I'm here in Washington or back home. But the Intelligence Committee run by our chairperson has not been meeting with any regularity and has not had any sort of meetings that would allow us to be able to be read into these kinds of situations that are going in the Caribbean or in Venezuela. And that's, I think, really terribly irresponsible. He has not organized any sorts of briefings, nor asked for many of them, and for the body of us, for the committee of us. And those are things that I think are part of our responsibility. Whether the government is quote unquote shut down or not, I am still here on duty, and I am still expecting that our intelligence community will provide these briefings to us that allow us to be able to be informed and allow us to be able to participate in our constitutional responsibility on this issue and many other issues as well, obviously. And so this is something that is a less obvious consequence of a government shutdown, is this kind of abdication of congressional oversight in the intelligence space. I appreciate the question very much. It's something that I'm working on actively, as I mentioned, with this particular piece of legislation and with some other pieces of legislation and briefing requirements that I am working on that you may hear about later on this week. Thank you so much for your question.
Thanks, Chrissy. Our next question is from Bill P. This is an online question, and he wants to know, what is Congress doing to keep and or make healthcare affordable? Is there a plan?
And now I appreciate the question, and this was basically the stuff of the last month and a half. The arguments that Democrats were making and Republicans were receiving was that it was not okay to continue business as usual strategy with our government and with our budgets for a number of reasons, but the biggest reason for the conflict was about the affordability of healthcare. And to be very specific, during COVID, there was a extension of some tax credits for the Affordable Care Act that allowed people in a very important crisis, health crisis for the country and for the world, to be able to better afford to pay for the Affordable Care Act. As a consequence, 22 million people nationwide became insured and insured at a level that was affordable to them, that were not there before, not insured before. And as a consequence of this expiring I guess it's January 1st timeframe, those 22 million people will likely face significant increases in their premiums. Many of them, up to 2 and 3 times what they are currently paying. We received a phone call from a constituent recently that said her payments were going to go from about $100 something a month to more than $1,000 something a month. In her particular case, an enormous increase. But another example would be a 55-year-old earning nearly $63,000 in Pennsylvania will see their premium increase by $4,000 on average. So this is what's at stake. This is what the battle was about, was the affordability for all of us to be able to be insured. Importantly, the battle was also not just for those who were insured by the Affordable Care Act, but also for those who are insured maybe by private or insurance companies. The implications for people dropping off of the Affordable Care Act because they can't afford it any longer affect those of us who have private insurance too, because it means that more people are going to have no health care or less health care, and they're going to end up having to be still sick, going to our hospitals for emergency care. This will drive up the insurance rates for all of us, not just because they're availing themselves of emergency care, but because the population at large gets sicker and sicker. And so this was that's what the battle was about. In the end, we were fighting about that, and the question from the caller was about what are we going to do about it. And I think that the problem that I have right now is I'm not sure what we're going to do about it now, because we ended the shutdown with no resolution to this problem that is still going to hit us all between the eyes in January. And so what can we do? One thing to me still in play is extending those Affordable Care Act credits. I believe very strongly that at this point in time, this is what our best option is. It's not perfect. It's probably not even optimal, but what we discovered through COVID is that people needed insurance, and the Affordable Care Act was the most viable, affordable option that we have. What we also discovered during the last decade plus is that the majority party, the Republican Party right now, is arguing vociferously that this is not the plan they wanted, but has provided no other options. And so do I think that somehow we're going to come up with a plan in the next several weeks that reinvents healthcare? No. But I do think that extending the credits is a viable option. In the longer term, mid to long term, I believe very much that we do need to pursue what I call and many people call a public option. This would be a government-run insurance health program that would allow for people to opt in to something that's not a private insurance program, which would compete, alongside the private insurance programs or those that we're more traditionally aware of. And hopefully would be viable enough that it would become the plan of choice. We also need to make sure that we're making prescriptions more affordable. We need to make sure that we're protecting Medicare and Medicaid. Unfortunately, part of the One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed in July will do the exact opposite. It will make Medicare and Medicaid less affordable, less accessible, less easy for people to have. And so these are things that very much concern me, and this is why that argument continues to this moment. Affordability in general is, I think, going to be a really important conversation. We see now that it's not just whether we can afford our health care, but it's also the fact that our housing is increasingly more expensive and has not, abated. It's also that our food, specifically things like beef or hamburgers, is more expensive too. So we have a lot of work to do to address this issue. Things haven't gotten better over the last 10, 11, 12 months, and we need to address those, and it starts with healthcare. Thanks very much for the question.
Thanks, Chrissy. We've got a lot of questions stacking up that are similar, so I'm going to try and combine one here. From Barbara Kay and a bunch of other folks who have sent this question in, will the Epstein files actually be released?
I'm not certain how that's all going to unfold. I am, watching the news just as you are. My understanding is the president is considering whether or not he's going to sign what the House and the Senate now have passed, which would be to release the Epstein files, so to speak. There's a lot of banter back and forth amongst, members of Congress of what does release mean, how does release happen, who does it come from. I think that's pretty complicated and a lot of moving parts there. And I know that there's some understandable concern about how they are released and whether they are redacted and in what way. What I will say is that I had the privilege of standing with many of the survivors of the Epstein period, and what I was struck by was that they were collectively supportive of the language of the House version of this legislation that talked about the redaction, talked about, how it was going to be done, and they were comfortable with that. They felt as though that they would be protected as the, kind of plaintiffs or survivors, and they were happy with how that was written. It's too recent for me to have been able to follow how the Senate passed it and what it looks like and whether there's any reconciliation required. But my feeling is that it is now with the president to sign and to execute on. And I'm really, really hopeful that this is something that we all can agree, regardless of partisanship or party affiliation, needs to happen. Transparency is really, really important. So we shall see what happens in the next days and hours, frankly.
Thank you, Chrissy. We are going to go to our next question. This one is also online from Mark J. And he is asking, what is your position on HR 622, the Restoring Equal and Accountable Legislators in the House Act, called the Real House Act?
Wow, that's a very specific question. Let me think. I'm not sure that I am aware of that particular act. I think that this, though it sounds like it talks about how many people should be representing individual districts, and my understanding and appreciation right now of legislation, of how we decide how many people are in each congressional district, is that we each represent about 750,000 people. I think that what you're talking about is a piece of legislation that would adjust that number and perhaps make the people closer to their government. I appreciate where that comes from, right? I appreciate where the essence and the spirit of that comes from, but I also have to speak, kind of pragmatically and practically. There are 435 of us. We represent 700 and something thousand people. If we increase the number of representatives, I think that it makes it more complicated how we manage the body itself. And right now, I honestly, having 7 years under my belt, feel as though this representative government with this number of people is manageable. And were it to be more people in the body, I'm worried that it would be really unwieldy from a space and resources perspective, also from just managing, coalitions and that kind of thing. I had the privilege of being able to go to China and see their Hall of Representatives, and this, you could argue that they're not necessarily actually representatives, but 10,000 seats. And I just had this overwhelming feeling of the impossibility of managing any sort of real government of and by the people with more seats than what we have. So I guess that's my knee-jerk, but certainly would have to think about it a little bit harder on that one.
Thank you. That was a great question. Chrissy, question number 5 comes from John, who lives in Reading, and he said, I voted for President Trump because of Biden's open borders. Our country needs to be secure. It seems now that they are arresting anyone and everyone, not just people who are drug dealers and criminals. What is going on?
Hi, I appreciate the question very much. Couple things here. One is, you're right. We are a nation of laws, and we are a nation with a border, and we all want to make sure that we have strong borders and also strong immigration law. And I think what, in my, watching what's happened over the last 9 or 10 months, that's not what we're seeing. We're not even seeing what I believe our President Trump ran for office promising. He ran for office promising that he would close the border and that he would arrest those who were the worst among us. This is not what we are collectively seeing happening. We are seeing the arresting of citizens. We are seeing the arresting of people who are here legally with status. We are seeing in our district alone, we have seen some people who have been bounced to more than a dozen places in their detention experience, and then been released for different reasons. ICE agents have arrested, it's estimated, about 130 American citizens. They've been actually arrested a dozen or so elected officials for interfering with assaulting officers. So this is not what I believe this president ran on, and I don't believe that this is what people voted for. What we need is to make sure that we have secure borders. We also need to make sure that we have a more robust legal immigration process to bring people into the country in whatever way they are able to participate, whether as citizens or under visas or whatever. That needs to happen. Unfortunately, I'm also very distressed by the fact that it seems like a lot of our resources are being turned towards this sort of ICE activities. JAG officers, Department of Homeland Security folks who should be on the border are now on the interior of our country. God forbid something should happen at one of our borders. And so these are things that I think should distress us all. I am very, very interested in working across the aisle, and in fact have worked on something called the Dignity Act, which is a bipartisan piece of legislation that would allow us to reform this area. And I think that's what needs to happen. This needs to be in the purview and the area of the Congress, and not with the executive branch.
Thanks, Chrissy. That's a big question, and here's one that is related and comes from Francis B., who sent in an online question. When are you going to take accountability for bad policies like $2 trillion in deficits that caused inflation and open border policies that caused the current unaffordability issues?
Hi, Francis B. Thank you so much for your question. Interestingly enough, I'm one of the very few, almost fewer than a dozen members of Congress that are part of something called the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum. It is a group of members of Congress who are involved in working bipartisanly on addressing this issue of how we manage our budget and how we manage our deficits and debts. And I think that we have collectively on both sides of the aisle, in many cases, acted and spent money that we ought to be concerned about. I will say that as an example, during COVID, we were in a very, very unique situation where we needed to make sure that we literally survived the day. And so there was certainly spending that went on kind of once in a generation, maybe even in 100 years spending. But that was for a particular purpose. It now needs to be dialed back. Unfortunately, what we're seeing with this administration is that that's not happening. You know, this administration came into office promising that they would be the opposite of what they saw as profligate spending. And in fact, the One Big Beautiful Bill is projected to be able to be increasing the national deficit by something like $3.4 trillion over the next decade. And I'll pause and I'll say that again, because this is something that I think that we all need to focus on. $3.4 trillion increase in national deficit because of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, largely because this is an expansion of tax credits that will help the most wealthy amongst us and not those of us who are kind of the average bear. And that's really, really concerning to me. How do we fix this? We work together. We work on the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum. We work with a commission that I have been supportive of and that Representative McCarthy, when he was Speaker of the House, was supportive of, to make sure we're addressing these spending issues bipartisanly and responsibly. And that it takes us all to be cooperative and collaborative. And right now what we're seeing is the exact opposite of that. Over the last 50 days, as you may have followed, our Speaker, the Speaker of the House, never once in 50 days contacted the leader of the House, which is the leader of the minority party, to try to have a conversation about how to get ourselves out of this. And that's one of the things that I cannot abide by. We need to work with one another, and I work very much every day to do that.
Thank you, Chrissy. We have another online question. This one comes from Ellen W. And this is very timely. She said, you recently made a video telling military personnel that they may refuse an illegal order. To me, to Ellen, this sounds like a call for the military to use their own judgment as to whether they decide to obey an order or not. This sounds like a call for insurrection.
Hi, Ellen, and I really, really appreciate you and your question. This is a video that was made by a number of my colleagues and I, all of whom have served either in the military or in many of our intelligence communities. So we know of what we speak. We were brought up under this set of rules, set of requirements, set of behavior and norms that we are required to abide by. I specifically grew up in a military family, grew up with my father talking to me about the law of war, talking to me about international law, talking to me about the Uniform Code of Military Justice, talking to me about my responsibility to follow legal orders and to not follow illegal orders, that it was my obligation to do both. And so he raised me as a child talking to me about this, the importance of making sure that when you are given an order, that if you, for whatever reason, believe it not to be a legal order, that you have an obligation to question the person who's given it to you once. And if that satisfied to your answer to your satisfaction, then you have an obligation, if you believe it to be an illegal order, to bring it to your chain of command, to bring it to the JAG, to bring it up your organization to talk about this. And we have protections for people in the military and in the intelligence community to be able to do just that. Listen, it's really important that you hear what I'm saying. What I am saying is that if you're a member of the military or you're a member of the intelligence community, you have an obligation to follow international law, to follow the law of war, to follow the Uniform Code of Military Justice, to follow the Constitution. I'll give you some examples of why this is at issue. Right now, some of the behaviors of our commander-in-chief have been questionable. He has alarmed many people in the international community about human rights problems. He has deported, as we've just talked about, many immigrants without due process. He has held detainees in inhumane conditions. He has threatened to remove people from Gaza illegally. He has moved the National Guard and federal troops to cities without invitation. These are all things that should worry people. Are they illegal? That's what the question is. The question is whether or not we need to make sure that the courts decide those things. We need to make sure that people ask those questions. Am I telling, young men and women to disobey lawful orders? Absolutely not. But I'm reminding young men and women who wear the uniform and those who are involved in the intelligence community that they have an obligation to not obey unlawful orders. And I think that that's a really important training reminder. And I really believe that our men and women in uniform understand that this is what their responsibility is.
Thank you, Chrissy. Okay, we have another online question, and this one comes from Joyce in Westchester. And Joyce says, why can't you do more to stop President Trump from destroying our country? I am so upset about the East Wing of the White House and everything that he is doing.
Hi, Joyce. I appreciate your question as well, and I think that these questions reflect the complexity of and the diversity of our community. We all come at these questions with an enormous sense of patriotism, an enormous sense of duty and responsibility to our company or to our country. And so I really appreciate your question in the same essence, in the same spirit that I appreciate the last one. One thing that I would say is I am also very upset about the West Wing of the White House and everything that kind of represents. I don't think there should be a world where any president of the United States, regardless of their party, can act unilaterally on many of the things that this president has acted unilaterally on, but certainly on the destruction of a historic residence and part of the White House is kind of a beyond the pale thing. What I'd like you to remember, and this is important for all of us to remember, is that elections have consequences. And in this particular case, in this last federal election, we are in Democrats, which I am one of, we're in the minority. The House is majority Republicans, the Senate is majority Republicans, and the White House is held by a Republican President Trump at this time. So in the minority in this way, we are in many cases hamstrung to do a lot of the things that I wish I could do. I want to make sure that people understand, as an example, that I don't personally, individually, and my party doesn't get to decide what we are voting on, as an example. Yesterday, I spent almost the entire day voting on motions to censure people and voting on motions to disapprove of people and voting on things that I've voted on before within the last year and a half. And those things will probably go nowhere. unfortunately, I would like to be spending my time talking about many of the conversations we've had in this conversation. I'd like to talk about how to fix our immigration system. I'd like very much to talk about how to fix how we decide how to budget for this nation. I'd like very much to talk about some of the issues in healthcare. But unfortunately, I don't get to make that choice. And so what I would encourage you, all of you who are listening, whatever your political ideology or propensity is to recognize that elections really matter and that your voice really matters.
Thank you, Chrissy. Enough questions tonight. Okay, moving on. Another online question from Picopson. This comes from Kathy, and she says, our veterans need help. What can you do to make sure that they don't become homeless?
Hi, Kathy. We do spend a lot of time on our veteran population in our office. I, of course, have a particular personal passion for veterans, and because I am one, and having one as a dad, and many of my cousins are vets as well. I really am worried about a lot of the things that are going on with to undermine the health and safety of our veterans population. Homelessness is a real issue amongst veterans. They are more likely to be homeless than other people from our population are. And unfortunately, the administration has issued plans to really shift homelessness policies that would slash a lot of the money, speaking of money, for long-term housing projects. A lot of people are really worried that it really could displace as many as nearly 200,000 homeless people who are now in homes and return them to the streets as a result of these slashing of programs. That's really concerning. When we cut programs like this, we know that we're cutting the very people who have served us. A lot of people pay literal lip service to our veterans by thanking them for their service. But the way that we can really, truly thank them for their service is to make sure that we're supportive of them, literally by providing roofs over their head when they're in stress, and health care for them as well, for their long-term viability.
Thank you, Chrissy. Chrissy, I'm going to tell you that this is our last question because we end at 7:15. Let people go and have some dinner and let your team leave for the night. And this comes from Frances B. This is her second question tonight.
Hi, Frances.
And the question is, why do you not support national voter ID and citizenship requirements? Wouldn't they end the noise about the lack of trust in our voting process?
Hi, Frances. Again, I actually am supportive of ID laws, and I'm on the record for being supportive of those. That being said, I do still very much believe that individual states should have the ability to make their own decisions on these issues. And I am still struggling with how to execute on this, ID requirement. I think that we need to make sure we understand how we will execute on it, and make sure that we are supportive of the costs that it will take to make that happen. I, of course, believe, and it is the law, that only citizens should be able to vote in federal elections. And I also very strongly believe to my core that currently our elections are indeed free and fair. Obviously, there are sometimes complications, and we've seen some of them in our own community as well, but I don't believe any of those to be malicious in nature. But to answer your question flat out, I believe it would be nice if we were to be able to execute on IDs, but this is something that I believe should land with the states and is something that I worry about the cost of.
Okay, Chrissy, that wraps up our questions for the night. Thank you to everybody who has called, everybody who is still online listening, either on YouTube or Facebook, or on their phones. We are delighted to have you. I'm going to send this back to you, Chrissy, for your closing remarks.
Thank you, Erin, and I echo Erin's appreciation for you guys all to have joined us tonight. This, as I mentioned, is one of our, I think, proudest traditions, which is to make sure that we continue to communicate with our community, even when I'm in Washington, D.C. Thank you again for spending your time with me, and thank you to my team for managing the hundreds of callers who have joined these conversations. I really appreciate being able to hear directly from you. When I first ran for Congress, I promised that I would lead with civility and that I would work to lead with bipartisan solutions and to focus on what I think is important, which is common sense and fiscally responsible governing. And that still stands today, even in a time when it's hard really to see common ground. It's really important that I serve our community and the Commonwealth and our country in this way. I will continue to work to build durable and lasting legislation, legislation and laws that hopefully reflect our shared values. And I recognize that we are a complicated community. We're a complicated country as well. I look for those opportunities constantly. As recently as today, I sat in the Republican club and spoke with one voice with my Republican colleague about the importance of thinking about biotech and biosecurity. I did the same in a bipartisan meeting that focused on the environment. These are things that I do every single day. Government at its best is definitely imperfect, and it really is supposed to be almost by design. In fact, indeed by design, a process of give and take. But when it is functioning, it delivers real results. And right now, unfortunately, a lot of things are not as functional as we need them to be. When leaders refuse to govern, when institutions are undermined from within, the consequences are really, really serious for all of us. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. And it's worrying to me, as I know it's worrying to you based on the calls and questions that we've received today. I know that many of you in our community support the goals of this current administration. And I, in fact, share some of those goals too. I very much believe in improving efficiency. I believe that we need to reduce waste. I know that we need to have a stronger fiscal footing. Those are really important and valid objectives. But for me, what I see from my vantage point, we're going beyond those aims, and the actions that are being taken in the name of those goals are destabilizing and harmful. So I can't just stay silent in the face of things that I believe threaten this democracy and the democratic institutions that we value. Our national security and the well-being of the American people is legitimately at stake. So I'm asking you, and I know you guys will do this for all of us, not to stay silent either, and that's why I know that you're participating tonight, because your voice really matters. It matters all the time, but particularly in this moment. So I'd ask you to continue to speak up. I would also ask you to continue to talk to your friends, to understand how these decisions are affecting them, how you are affected by them as well. One of the things that I think is most valuable about our community, as diverse and eclectic as we are, is that we continue to have open and welcoming conversations. So I'm very much appreciative of the opportunity to talk with you again. Thank you so much for taking an hour out of your lives to hang out with us, and I will let my team go at this point in time, and I will head off to vote. And thank you once again for your time.
Thank you, Chrissy, and thank you to all of our guests. Have a great rest of your night.